Donald Trump surprises a young veteran. His words leave the room in tears. There was a presence about Donald Trump that few could ignore. Whether standing behind a podium at a rally, seated in the Oval Office making decisions that shaped a nation, or walking into a room filled with dignitaries and soldiers, he carried an undeniable aura of strength and leadership. But tonight was different. Tonight, in the grand ballroom of the White House, Trump wasn't just the president. He was a man honoring another man's sacrifice. As he stepped onto the stage, dressed in his signature navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and a bold red tie, the room fell into a hushed silence. The once buzzing crowd of military officials, veterans, and guests now watched in anticipation. Seated at the front, wearing his well-pressed Marine dress uniform, was Corporal Jake Thompson, a young soldier who had given more for his country than most could ever comprehend. A man who had left a part of himself on the battlefield, returning home with one leg missing but a heart full of unshaken patriotism. Trump's gaze locked onto Jake, and in that moment, everyone in the room knew this wasn't going to be just another speech. He took a deep breath, then leaned into the microphone. Some heroes don't ask for recognition. Some heroes don't seek fame. They don't do it for medals or applause. They do it because they believe in something bigger than themselves. His voice was steady, filled with the weight of sincerity. The crowd listened, captivated, not by the usual fiery rhetoric, but by something much more rare. And then, in front of everyone, Donald Trump did something that no one expected. What happened next would leave the entire room in tears. Trump stepped away from the podium, his polished shoes echoing lightly across the hardwood floor. The air was thick with anticipation. He walked towards Jake Thompson, stopping just a few feet away. "Corporal Thompson," Trump said, his voice carrying the full weight of the room, "stand up, son." Jake hesitated. His crutches rested beside him, a sharp reminder of the price he had paid. With effort, he pushed himself up, balancing on his single leg, his chest rising with deep, controlled breaths. His eyes met Trump's, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet, unwavering strength of a Marine. The room held its breath. And then, in a moment no one had anticipated, Trump raised his hand in salute. A collective gasp swept through the audience. It was a rare sight, the President of the United States saluting a soldier, not out of protocol, but out of profound respect. Jake's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with emotion. Without hesitation, he returned the salute, his hand steady despite the tremble in his fingers. For a few seconds, nothing else in the world seemed to matter. The President. The Marine. A moment frozen in time. Then, breaking the silence, Trump spoke again. "Heroes like you remind us what it means to be American. To fight, to sacrifice, and to never, ever give up. Because that is what makes our country great. Men like you. People who give everything and ask for nothing in return." Jake blinked rapidly, trying to suppress the overwhelming wave of emotion that threatened to break through. He had faced war, loss, and unimaginable pain, but this moment of recognition from his commander-in-chief, was something he never expected. Trump took another step forward and did something even more unexpected. He reached out and shook Jake's hand. Not just a quick, formal handshake. A firm, lasting grip, one that spoke volumes. One that said, "I see you. I honor you." Tears welled in the eyes of many in the audience. Some wiped them away discreetly, others made no effort to hide their emotions. Even hardened generals and seasoned veterans found themselves moved. Trump turned back to the audience, his expression serious. He wasn't done. "Ladies and gentlemen, this young man represents the best of us. The courage, the sacrifice, the commitment. It's men like Jake Thompson who remind us why we fight to keep this country strong. Why we must always honor our soldiers." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Jake, still standing, still gripping Trump's hand, could barely contain the overwhelming mix of pride, gratitude, and humility. Trump continued, his voice filled with conviction. "There was a time when this country took better care of its veterans. When we honored them not just with words, but with action. And I promise you, as long as I'm president, we will bring back that time." The applause grew even louder. Veterans in the crowd stood up in solidarity, some placing their hands over their hearts, others raising their fists in support. The energy in the room was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Then, Just when it seemed like the moment couldn't get any more emotional, Trump turned back to Jake with a knowing smile. "You know, Jake," he said, "I've read about your story. I know what you've been through. And I know that after everything you've done for this country, there's still one thing you're missing." Jake furrowed his brow slightly, unsure of what Trump meant. Then, from the side of the stage, a military aide stepped forward, holding a small, velvet box. Trump took it, opened it carefully, and revealed the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Gasps filled the room. Jake's eyes widened. His breath hitched. "This," Trump said, his voice filled with absolute sincerity, "is the highest civilian honor I can give. And I can think of no one more deserving than you." A single tear escaped Jake's eye, but he quickly wiped it away. He had never expected this, never thought of himself as a hero, despite everything he had been through. But at that moment, as Trump placed the medal around his neck, he realized something. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a veteran. He was part of something bigger. And the entire room, the entire nation watching, knew it too. As Trump stepped back and saluted once more, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause, the cheers, the unity in that room, it was a moment of pure, unfiltered patriotism. Jake Thompson had come to the White House expecting nothing. He left with the greatest honor of his life. The applause thundered through the White House ballroom, a powerful display of unity and respect. Veterans, officials, and everyday Americans in attendance were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping away tears. But no one was more overwhelmed than Corporal Jake Thompson. Standing tall in his Marine dress uniform, the Presidential Medal of Freedom now resting against his chest, Jake felt something stir deep inside him, a sense of honor, of validation, of belonging. For years, he had convinced himself that his sacrifice was just part of the job, that he didn't need recognition. Yet, here he was, receiving the highest civilian honor from the President of the United States. And in that moment, he realized something he had long forgotten. His story mattered. As the applause settled, Donald Trump took a step forward, placing a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. The cameras flashed, capturing the raw emotion of the moment. Then, Trump turned back to the crowd, his voice filled with conviction. Jake's story is not just his own, it is the story of countless brave men and women who serve this nation. The room fell silent again, hanging on to every word. And I ask you all tonight, how many more heroes like Jake are out there, struggling in silence? How many of them return home to a system that fails them? How many of them feel forgotten? Murmurs spread through the audience. Trump wasn't just here to honor Jake, he was here to send a message. For too long, we have let our veterans fight battles overseas, only to return home and fight battles alone. That stops now. More applause erupted, but Trump wasn't finished. He turned back to Jake, his expression sincere. "Jake, I want to ask you something." Jake, still processing everything, straightened up. "Yes, sir." Trump's gaze was unwavering. What was the hardest part of coming home? Jake swallowed. No one had ever asked him that so directly, not like this. He glanced down for a moment, collecting his thoughts, then looked up, meeting the president's eyes. "It wasn't the injury, sir," he said quietly. "It was feeling invisible." The words hit the room like a gut punch. Jake took a deep breath and continued, his voice steady but raw. "Coming home and realizing that while I had changed, the world around me hadn't. That people thanked me for my service but didn't really see me. That's the hardest part." The weight of his words settled over the crowd like a heavy fog. No one moved. No one spoke. Trump nodded, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, he placed his hand on Jake's shoulder again. "Well, you're not invisible anymore." A ripple of emotion swept through the room. Some gasped. Others whispered. But most simply stared, because in that single moment, Trump had captured the silent struggle of millions of veterans. Jake's breathing hitched, his eyes burning. For the first time in years, he truly believed it. After a long moment, Trump turned back to the audience. "This country owes our veterans more than just gratitude. We owe them action." He glanced at his staff, then at the military officials in the crowd. The energy in the room shifted. Something big was coming. "That's why, tonight, I am signing an executive order that will change the way we care for our veterans." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Jake's eyes widened. He had expected an award, not policy change. Trump continued. Starting today, every veteran will have direct access to the best medical care, career opportunities, and mental health resources, without the bureaucratic red tape. The audience erupted into applause. But Trump wasn't finished. And for heroes like Jake, who have given everything, we are launching a new initiative. A nationwide veteran support program, named in honor of those who serve. Jake felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just a speech. This was history. As the applause continued, a staff member rushed forward, holding a leather-bound folder. Inside was the executive order, ready to be signed. Trump walked over to the small table beside the podium, picked up a gold pen, and with one strong stroke, signed his name. He held up the document. "This is for you, Jake. This is for all of you." The room exploded with applause. Veterans stood, saluting. Some held back tears. Jake clenched his jaw, trying to steady himself. He had spent years believing he was just another soldier. Now, he was the face of something far greater. Trump turned back to him, his voice quieter but no less powerful. "You started something tonight, son." Jake's breath was unsteady. "I just told my story, sir." Trump gave a small nod. "And that story just changed lives." A beat of silence passed between them. Then, Trump extended his hand. Jake took it. And in that moment, the world watched as a president and a soldier stood together, not as politicians and warriors, but as Americans, bound by something greater than words. The room was still buzzing from Donald Trump's unexpected announcement. Veterans in the audience, many of whom had long felt abandoned by the system, stood in stunned silence, trying to absorb what had just happened. A promise had been made. A commitment had been signed into history. But for Corporal Jake Thompson, this moment was something else entirely. He had come to the White House expecting nothing. Maybe a handshake, maybe a few words of appreciation. He never imagined he would become the symbol of a movement. As he stood there, his hand still gripping the president's, he felt the full weight of what had just unfolded. He was no longer invisible. And neither were the countless other veterans who had walked the same difficult path. Within minutes, news outlets across the country were broadcasting the moment live. The image of Donald Trump saluting Jake Thompson, the moment when Trump placed his hand on Jake's shoulder and promised change, the signing of the executive order, it all became instant history. Social media exploded. Small Blue Diamond, say what you want about Trump, but this moment was powerful. Small Blue Diamond, this is leadership. Honoring our veterans should always be above politics. Small Blue Diamond, I'm not crying, you're crying. God bless this Marine. God bless America. Even critics of the president found themselves unable to deny the weight of what had just happened. The clip of Jake saying, "The hardest part was feeling invisible," was shared millions of times, sparking a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. And for Jake, who had spent so long trying to move forward without asking for recognition, he suddenly found himself at the center of something far bigger than himself. As the event began to wind down, Trump signaled for Jake to follow him. Together, they walked through the side doors into a quieter hallway, just the two of them. Jake still felt the heavy metal around his neck, but his mind was spinning. Trump turned to face him, his usual commanding presence a little softer now. "How are you holding up, son?" he asked. Jake exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't even know how to answer that, sir." Trump chuckled, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "It's a lot, isn't it?" Jake nodded. "Yes, sir. I never expected any of this." The president's expression grew serious. "I want you to know something, Jake. This moment, this night, it's just the beginning. What you said out there, it mattered. More than you know." Jake hesitated. "I was just speaking the truth." Trump's gaze sharpened. "Exactly. And that's why people listened." There was a pause. Then, Trump did something Jake never expected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn-out coin. He turned it over in his fingers before handing it to Jake. Jake took it, confused. It was a challenge coin, the kind only given in the military to symbolize respect, brotherhood, and honor. Jake swallowed hard. This wasn't just any coin. It had the presidential seal engraved on one side. Trump watched him for a moment. "I don't give those to just anyone." Jake clenched his jaw, his fingers gripping the cool metal. This meant something. More than the medal. More than the applause. This was a private gesture, a personal acknowledgement that went beyond the cameras and headlines. And Jake knew, in that moment, that whatever happened next, he had a responsibility to carry this forward. When Jake walked back into the main ballroom, the energy was still electric. Reporters were lining up, eager to get a statement from him. He looked over at Trump, who simply nodded at him, as if to say, "This is your moment now." Jake took a deep breath. He had never sought the spotlight, but now he had something to say. He turned toward the cameras. "If you're watching this right now, and you're a veteran who's struggling, I want you to know, you are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And you never will be." A powerful silence fell over the room. Jake's voice was steady, but his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We all served this country because we believed in something greater than ourselves. And now, it's time for this country to stand up for us, just like President Trump did tonight." The room erupted into applause again, but Jake wasn't done. He looked directly into the cameras, his message clear and direct. "To every veteran out there, I see you. And I will fight for you, just like we all fought for this country." And with that, the moment was sealed in history. What happened that night wasn't just a speech. It was a turning point. The executive order Trump had signed led to sweeping changes in how veterans received care. Hospitals opened new programs. Employment opportunities expanded. The country finally started talking about veterans in a real, meaningful way. And Jake became the face of it all. Interviews, speeches, advocacy. He took the momentum from that night and turned it into a movement. And through it all, he never forgot the moment that started it. That moment when Donald Trump looked him in the eye and told him he was seen. That moment when the president saluted him. That moment when an entire country remembered what true honor looked like. And that moment when, for the first time in years, Jake Thompson stood tall, not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of something far greater. Because on that night, in that room, in front of millions watching, America didn't just honor a veteran. America finally saw him.